In this lesson, we're going to learn the pronunciation of 15 words that students very, very often get wrong. This lesson is especially useful if you are a pre-intermediate, intermediate, or an upper intermediate student of English. Even advanced students are going to find these words very useful because they often mispronounce them too. As always in these lessons, we're going to study the words on their own first, and I'll be giving you lots of tips and tricks on how to say them. We're then going to practice these words in sentences, because it's always important to practice pronunciation in context. And finally, we'll put all of them into a little story and practice them even more. So, without further ado, let's deal with our first word. And our first word is an extreme adjective that means really, really big, but it's a really, really big problem for students in terms of pronunciation. If you don't know how to say it, lots of students are confusing it with this word. So this one is hug, but the one here is definitely not hug. Listen, huge. Huge. This word is pronounced with U inside, with the long oo there, and it ends in j, just as the beginning of the word just or gym. Huge. Huge. Now let's move on to our next word. How would you pronounce it? Lots of students are having problems here because of the vowel sound in the first syllable. So, how do we say it? Well, we say it in exactly the same way as we would say it in this word. So, how? However, this may seem quite basic and easy to you, but you wouldn't believe how many students are actually pronouncing this word as ho. But if you say ho, you sound like Santa Claus going down the chimney. Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! So please, don't say ho and however. Say how and however. Ow. Now let's move on to our next word. Now how would you say it? Lots of students are having problems here because of the pronunciation of the AW at the end. Lots of students are saying low. But if you say low, you are actually saying this word. This is low. So what about this one? Listen and check. Law. Law. Can you hear the difference? Low is pronounced with the O sound. Low. On the other hand, law is pronounced with a long O. Law. Low, law. And of course, the word that comes from law is lawyer, also pronounced with a long O inside. Law, lawyer. Let's move on to the next word. Now this is a really tricky one. Why? Because lots of students mispronounce the ending. Now of course you can see red here, and maybe you were thinking about the color red, but do we actually say red at the end of this word? Listen and check. Retired. Retired. What did you hear at the end? Was it red? No, it wasn't. It was ed. Retired. Retired. Now, why does that happen? Well, it happens because retired comes from retire. And in English, when you add an ed ending in a situation like this, you don't add any extra syllables. That means that we have to say retire and then add the d sound. That's why we say retired, retired. Now, in case you're wondering why I'm not pronouncing the letter R inside retired, it's because my accent is British, and in situations like these, we don't normally say the letter R. However, in international English, it's absolutely fine to pronounce the R, and I would definitely encourage you to do that. So you don't have to say retired the way I say it, you can say retired. Just remember that this R sound is a really soft sound, yeah? Your tongue is not touching the roof of your mouth, so you're not saying R. No, 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 no. Retired. That second R sounds exactly in the same way as the first one in this word. Retired. Retired. Another word starting with R. How would you say it? This is a very challenging word. And the question is, how many syllables does it have? Would you say 2 or 3? What would your answer be? Lots of students would say 2, and that would be incorrect. Listen and check. Recipe. Recipe. Probably lots of surprises here. Number 1, that E at the end is actually pronounced. This is a big surprise because normally in English, of course, we don't pronounce the final E, it's silent, but not in this word. Recipe. And also, can you hear where I'm putting the emphasis, the stress in this word? Listen, recipe. Which syllable is stressed? Recipe. The first one. Recipe. A really surprising word. Now, actually, surprising is the next word on our list today. Did you hear how I pronounced the UR at the beginning of this word? Listen again. Surprising. Surprising. How is the letter U pronounced? It's not U, right? That's the problem a lot of students have with this word. They say sur, but it's not sur. In English, when you've got U and R and there is another consonant, it's definitely not going to be pronounced as U. In this word, because that first syllable is not stressed, that letter U is pronounced in a very, very short way, as the. Surprising. Surprising. Again, you can say the letter R inside this word, there's no problem, and say surprising. Surprising. But whatever you do, this first syllable is going to be super short. So please remember, don't say U inside this word, because it sounds really, really bad when you do. Try to practice it, and then you'll get it right. Surprising. Surprising. Let's have a look at another adjective now. And here the challenge is in the ending. How would you say those last 3 letters here? Lots of students would say us, but it's not pronounced like that. Listen. Delicious. Delicious. What did you hear at the end? It wasn't was it? It was us. Very, very short. Delicious. It sounds very similar to the letter S in the English alphabet. It's just a little bit shorter. Us. Delicious. This is a general rule you can apply to any longer adjective in English that ends in OUS. So we're going to say generous, famous, nervous. All of these endings are pronounced as us. Try to remember that. Now let's leave the adjectives aside and let's go to another word. How would you say it? Lots of students here are having problems because this is a very counterintuitive word. We see the letter O at the beginning, and of course, what do? We want to say O. But guess what? In English, this is pronounced as oven. Oven. What did you hear at the beginning of this word? It was the short A sound, wasn't it? Oven. Oven. Now, since we're doing vocabulary that's a little bit related to cooking and kitchens. How would you say this one? Lots of students pronounce it as desert. But if you say desert, you actually mean this one. So don't ask for a dessert when you are at a restaurant. Ask for a dessert. Dessert. Can you hear the difference? Dessert is stressed on the second syllable. Dessert. There is a long air inside that second syllable. Dessert. The place with sand, on the other hand, is called a desert. Stress on the first syllable, and the vowels are much shorter inside this word. Dessert, desert. Now let's have a look at our next word, and this one can be particularly difficult. This is a word that's hard for students to understand, especially when it's spoken by British speakers. There are many syllables here, and British speakers don't pronounce the letter R inside. So we say particularly. Particularly. Of course, you can pronounce the letter R in international English and say particularly. Particularly. But pay attention that the first syllable is super short, just as in surprise, particularly, particularly, very, very short, and the letter U inside this word is pronounced as U, just as the pronoun or the letter U in the English alphabet. Particularly. Or in international English with the R's, particularly. Particularly. It takes some practice to get it right. In any case, let's have a look at our next word. And this one is surprising because of how the letter O is pronounced. So how would you say it? Listen and check. Wonderful. Wonderful. What did you hear? Was it an O or an A? Wonderful. A short A sound, just as in the word oven. Wonderful. Oven. A wonderful oven. For recipes that are delicious. Let's move on to our next word. We actually only have three more words to go. And this one is particularly tricky because of the pronunciation of the ed ending. Now you will remember that when we said the ed ending in retired, we didn't add any extra syllable to the verb. And it's the same with this one. So how would you say it? Listen and check. Managed. Managed. Now this is probably the most difficult type of ed ending to say in English. We pronounce it as jd. Jd. This means that we are putting the j sound, the same sound as we've got at the beginning of the word gym, j, and then we immediately follow it with the d sound. Jd. Jd. We put no vowels in between. And this is important because if you put a vowel in between and you add an extra syllable, you completely change the meaning. If you added an extra syllable, you would say, manage it. In other words, you would be giving me an order to manage something. So it's very, very important not to add this extra syllable. And say, managed. Managed. Now it can be very, very hard to say this ending right, and you really need to practice. Lots of speakers can't say jd at the end, and they say cht. That's not a huge problem. It's not correct if you say managed, but it's much, much better than adding any extra syllables at the end of this word. So if you can't manage to say managed, Say managed and it's going to be okay. Nobody is going to misunderstand you. People will misunderstand you, however, if you add an extra syllable at the end of managed. So, managed. And now let's move on to the next word. We've got 2 to go only. So how would you say it? This is a word that students very often confuse with this one. So what's the difference? Listen. Whole, whole. Whole is pronounced with the O sound. We're connecting O and U. O. Whole. It's difficult to say because of that L just after the O. Whole. This one, on the other hand, is hall. It's pronounced with a long O. Hall. Whole. Hall. In case you're wondering, whole sounds identically to whole. So whole, whole, hall. The whole hall was full of holes. Just in case you wanted to torture yourself. In any case, remember that this word is pronounced with the O sound. Whole. And finally, we're moving on to our last word today, and it's this one. How would you say it? My question here is about the letter E inside. How do you pronounce that E? Lots of students say it as E, but that's incorrect. You need to say extremely. Extremely. Can you hear how I pronounced that E? It was pronounced as the long E sound, extreme, extremely. Well, I hope it was maybe not extremely useful, but at least useful to you, and now it's time to practice the words we have studied and see how many we can remember. I'm going to show you each word for a few seconds, and your task is to try to remember and say it out loud. Then listen and check. Ready? Let's go. Huge. However. Lawyer. Retired. Recipe. Surprising. Delicious. Oven. Dessert. Desert. Wonderful. Managed. Whole. Extremely. Well done. How many did you remember? Are we improving our pronunciation? I definitely hope so. Now let's put all these words into sentences and practice them even more. Again, I'll show you each sentence before I read it out, so you have a chance to try it yourself. Then listen and repeat. Ready? Let's go! She managed to make a delicious dessert. The whole recipe was extremely simple, but surprisingly delicious. He recently retired and now shares oven recipes on YouTube. I couldn't believe he managed to eat that whole dessert. The trip across the desert was wonderful and not particularly exhausting. She was an extremely good lawyer, but she retired a while ago. Well done! Now, before we move on to the final part of this lesson, I wanted to let you know that if you'd really like to improve your pronunciation, you should consider joining my online learning community, Your English Upgrade. Your English Upgrade is a wonderful place if you want to improve your pronunciation and other skills, and join me learning English on one of the 2 weekly webinars that are available to any member of the community. When you become a member of Your English Upgrade, you immediately gain access to pronunciation hacks, a full pronunciation hacks course that I've designed that will help you sound better and more confident in English. And to push you even further, there are 2 weekly challenges for pronunciation practice that will really make you improve the way you speak. And, of course, you can download all the PDFs and audio practice files that go with this video and any other video that I post on YouTube. The link to the community is in the description. I'll see you there. Now let's come back to our story and let's put all the words that we have practiced today inside the broader context. So, again, I'm going to show you each sentence first, give you a little time to say it yourself, and then you will be able to listen and check. If you notice that you make any mistakes, pause the video and focus on repeating the words you said incorrectly. It's a very important part of pronunciation practice, and this repetition is really going to be worth your time. So, headphones on and try to read the text with me. Let's go! My friend worked as a lawyer at a huge international company based in London. She never liked the city, however, and when she retired, she moved to a small village away from the capital. One of her hobbies now is cooking, and she recently invited me for dinner at her place. I couldn't wait for the day to arrive because I really love the way she cooks. She only uses local products she buys at the village market and invents her own recipes, which are often surprising and delicious. One of the things she is particularly good at is desserts. And when I arrived at her place that afternoon, I could already smell something delicious baking in the oven. We had a wonderful time chatting and enjoying her delicious food. And when the dessert arrived at the table, it looked out of this world. The problem was that at that point we had had so much food that my stomach was almost full. Almost. I somehow managed to eat the whole portion of the dessert. I thought I was going to explode after that. In the end, however, rather than exploding, I simply had problems falling asleep on my extremely full stomach. Well done! How did it go? Did you get almost all the words we studied today right? I definitely hope so. If you made mistakes, remember to come back to these words and practice repeating them. That's the only way to improve your pronunciation. Repetition. Now, if you have any more energy to repeat even more words today, why don't you check out one of these two videos on pronunciation, and I'll see you right there. Take care, keep learning, and enjoy the process. Thank you very much for watching.